Welcome to Sat Interviews. This week, we sit down with Dr. Athol Williams live at an event right here at the University of Westminster in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, the South African Chamber of Commerce UK. Now, I have the privilege to speak to him about his past when it comes to the controversy with Baines & Co. and his current work with the University of Oxford. Stay tuned. It's going to be entertaining. Take care. Athol, thank you so much for joining us today. And you had such an impactful conversation with regards to strategy, ethics, business, and discussing the corporate culture within Africa and in particular South Africa.
Yeah.
Now, people here are in business. The critical question we're always going to ask is, how much is this going to cost us and how does that impact our bottom line? I mean, it's a good story.
Yeah. So,
my God, we need to make profits.
So let me rephrase your question then to make sure I understand it. You're saying, how does not exploiting people impact our bottom line?
In as much as we don't want to exploit people, we definitely want to have ethics in place. And there are policies that policymakers actually create, such as corporate responsibility, BEE, for instance. These ethical principles enable us to create policy around our local companies.
Yeah.
You're asking us to go an extra mile.
I am.
How does that impact?
Oh, it absolutely impacts your business, right? And so this is one of the arguments we get to say, well, okay, Athol, so what you're suggesting is to respect human rights more, to respect people more, it's going to increase my cost. And I go, so? I mean, in many ways, your costs are increasing, right? Businesses' costs increase all the time. Don't you innovate around cost increases? If cost increase is the reason for you not to do something, you wouldn't be in business, right? One. Secondly, I'm suggesting that if your business is built on the idea of being unethical, it's not a business that should survive, Farai.
No, I think you're looking at it from it's sort of like a totalitarian perspective in which ethics in themselves are defined within the confines of how you put it. Like, for instance, you are negating the fact that there already are policies that govern these particular businesses. My question is, now, if it impacts my bottom line, let's say I'm an SME, for instance, how do I balance that effect? So what is the sustainability aspect? Is there an argument that actually increases or enhances or incentivizes business to do this? Or there is no incentive at all?
You see, someone who grew up under apartheid South Africa, I automatically know that rules and policies can be unjust. So merely following a set of rules and policies for me does not suggest that you're necessarily doing the right thing. And this is why I'm suggesting we as business people to think far deeper than just following the rules and laws, is saying, what is the right thing to do? And then you can say, by the way, our rules and laws support that. But if we haven't even had that first thought, if we're just merely following those rules and laws, I think you end up in apartheid days, right? Where everyone said we were just following the rules. So I think that's the first part, is to say, let's first think about what the right thing to do is, and then make sure our rules and our laws support that. But let's go back to your core issue, right? So you're fundamentally saying, yes, I want to be an ethical business, but if you're an ethical business, as Athol's describing, right, your costs are going to go up, right? And again, I would say, yes, your costs are going to go up because you might have to pay people a fair wage. You might not have to pollute the local river. You might have to, give people extra protection. Well, that's what ethical business requires. So either say you can ignore ethics. Let's not play games then, right? Saying, I'm going to be, as people interpret Milton Friedman incorrectly, I'm going to just make money. I don't give a shit about anything else, right? And then run your business that way. I'm saying, don't then say we're going to be an ethical business, because just following the rules and laws is not ethical, right? And again, this important point that I'm not in the business of protecting as sacred companies. That's a very capitalist, modern capitalist idea. We said is, oh my God, don't let the companies go out of business. I think many companies should go out of business. If they're fundamentally built on unethical practices, they should go out of business.
It's funny, you sound like a commercial version of Malema in this context. And I ask this way purely because there is always this ideological narrative about communism, capitalism, socialism, and so forth. Now, in South Africa, given the societal divide between income and inequality and so forth, and the numbers are quite astonishing. Do you think ethical business, the particular the strategy and ethical elements you're introducing impact how we can then see the landscape of economics in Africa, in South Africa in particular?
So firstly, on your comment about Julius Malema, I would never sing "Kill the Boer." Right. I think that's part of this divisiveness we have in South Africa. But I think it's interesting you asked, but will it rephrase or reframe economics in Africa? And I go, where did economics in Africa come from? Right. Most executives across the continent have actually got their postgrad education in the West. Right. I mean, I'm among them. Right. You read out this list of universities I was at, but everyone goes to Harvard and learns about business in the West, and they then take that back and plonk that in Africa, forgetting the fact that we operate in a very different institutional environment, right? In the US, you might argue, maybe before this year, there was a very much stronger institutional environment upon which capitalism sat. In Africa, we don't have that.
A world that never stops. You need a connection that keeps up.
Introducing Clear Mobitel's UK eSIM and SIM solution, designed for the modern traveller, professional and digital native.
Stay connected wherever life takes you with Clear Mobitel's ultra-fast, reliable eSIM and SIM services. No more swapping SIM cards. Activate your eSIM in seconds and enjoy seamless, uninterrupted connectivity. Whether you're at home, at work or on the go, Clear Mobitel gives you fast data and crystal clear calls. No boundaries, no interruptions. Perfect for those who need high-speed data for business, entertainment, or everything in between.
And for those exploring the UK, say goodbye to roaming charges. Clear Mobitel keeps you connected without the extra cost.
Clear Mobitel, a new way to connect anytime, anywhere.
So I think we've become very confused. We don't have African leadership, I want to suggest, right? I've often asked CEOs in South Africa, black CEOs in South Africa, said, tell me how your business is different, given that you're black, right? And they go, why should it be different? Right? And I said, if we are saying this is part of our emancipation, this is part of the Africanization of the continent, we are running African businesses. I'm suggesting we run the business no different to white executives or foreign executives. And so we haven't got an African economics. We haven't thought about what it requires for us to uplift our people in businesses that are sustainable and meaningful for them and still make money. We haven't even tried to innovate because we're simply just taking models from the West and just plonking it down in our very unjust environment.
Okay, maybe that's actually quite a good subject there. So thinking from a corporate perspective, now I know in academia, you have decolonial studies, you have thinking around, how you look at the post-colonial, epicenter when epochal moments as it relates to corporate.
Yeah.
And you're saying that in the corporate sense, there isn't. We have a lot of studies around, be it theology, we've got, Black liberation theology. We have thinking around, methodologies of study as it pertains to decolonial thinking in communications and so forth. As we're hosted by Westminster University, the lead professor here has actually come up with a theme, Afro-oncology, and we were talking about that. Now, you're saying that in the corporate world, that sort of mode of thinking doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because we haven't had the impetus to do it, right? So again, you say, oh, my claim that businesses in South Africa are no different whether a white executive or a black executive is running it, right? So because we've just adopted the system that existed. So the whole thinking about decolonial is saying we're rejecting some part of what was there in the past, right? And we want to reinvent it. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about reinventing it. We are not doing that in economics. We're not doing that in finance. We're not doing that in any aspect of business, right? We go along with the idea of calling our people human resources, right? We've adopted literally every aspect of it. And I think that's a mistake. And I think that's partly why our society is fragmenting, because actually real people in our continent largely say, we don't even recognize these sort of ideologies you guys are bringing. And by the way, this idea of a drop-down menu, pick one, capitalism or communism or socialism, I think again that's what we do, and it's very lazy thinking. I prefer saying, how do we want to live? Right? Let's look at our society. Let's look at the fact that we've got children who can't read. Right? Now, what does that then mean? And if it means we need to, shave 2% off our GDP to focus on that, then so be it. Right? So this idea, and it's partly how we label this talk, was we seem to believe that we can grow ourselves out of our social problems. We seem to believe that economic growth is the only thing. All our president talks about is an economic growth investment. Of course, it's important, but that doesn't solve the social fractures we've got. And those social fractures require a different way of thinking. And I think it's more than just picking socialism, communism, or capitalism. I still say my view is from a capitalist standpoint. I believe in the power of capitalism to be innovative, to drive economic growth, to drive opportunity. And as I said in my talk, I believe it comes with constraints, right? And that constraint might actually then cap your profit. And I think most capitalists are shocked by this idea because they've grown up thinking, no, I can just make endless profit. The endless profit, not without constraint.
Which is good because it also speaks to sustainability, what is the long term, and so forth. Now, moving into the current issues happening in South Africa, in particular, the age of Trump. Ironically, you're talking about ethics. I don't know how much he has, but nevertheless, that's a subject for another day. And the current geopolitical conflict between the US and South Africa. Now, if you are an investment banker and you're thinking about investing in South Africa, of course, we've seen a slump in investment in the last a few weeks, post his announcement on the 9th of April, I believe. But today we've seen a rise in South African stock. The currency is doing better. There's greater stability. We're seeing interest from Europe of 9 billion investment going into South Africa and so forth. So there's that particular sort of multipolarity in as far as the impact.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that from a more strategic perspective? I've explored ethics, strategy.
Look, I think it's even more complex than just merely a strategy question, right? But because Trump's issues with South Africa are so multi-layered that some of it's got nothing to do with reality, firstly, right, about expropriating land as he understands it. He's got obviously a very strong issue with our support of the ICJ in the case against Israel, so that's playing into it. So the US-South Africa relations are not merely economic and trade. The crisis isn't just an economic and a trade one. It's actually got this ideological aspect of our view of Israel and also some of the other issues he's got with us. But I think just strategically, I think the President Ramaphosa has been saying, we should be speaking, right? We should have diplomacy, and I do think diplomacy is the best option there. Absolutely. One, to just rectify these misunderstandings, right? I think the difficulty with Trump is he seems unable to have deep, nuanced discussions. Just from the outside, my observation. I actually met him when I was at MIT, and we were a bunch of students, and he came and talked, and then he wanted to meet students. And it was interesting. He refused to shake any of our hands, right? Because he thought we had germs on us or something. So he was a very peculiar person. But I think diplomacy has got to be the way we resolve it. I think it's good that we haven't just retaliated as some other countries have. I think we haven't the capacity.
No, and I agree with you, but it takes two to tango when it comes to diplomacy.
Yeah.
In the instance of America, they don't have the intent to sort of engage.
Yeah.
From what we're reading anyway.
Yeah.
My question is, from a broader strategic standpoint, South Africa has quite a number of advantages. It's one of the most industrialized countries on the continent, and it can actually begin to pivot towards an intra-African trade and expand further south.
But to what end, Farai?
It's a 4-year term.
What I find interesting, again, in Africa, we talk about our Pan-Africanism and how we want to build our African Union and build a Pan-African economy. And in the 60s, we'd say we only have African borders because Europeans drew all these borders, and one day when we emancipated, we'll kind of get rid of all the borders. And in fact, since the 60s, we've got more borders, right? So in many ways, the strategic question and the role South Africa plays in Africa and Africa then with the US, many of those issues we've got to solve ourselves first, right? I don't think we've worked out really even across the continent of how to be economic partners in a powerful way. Why hasn't the AU stood together and say, well, why don't we resist?
I suppose that's where the strategic question lies. I mean, South Africa can take leadership given its capacity. Listen, currently, last year, South African trade completely, intra-African trade, stood at 18%. It's unacceptable if we're doing about over 60, 80% with the external world. Now, I think South Africa, given one, its industrialized, capacity, but more so, its strong financial institutions. It can take leadership. Why not?
I really can't answer that question. We got to get bigger minds in here, right?
You're the best mind for this.
A world that never stops. You need a connection that keeps up.
Introducing Clear Mobitel's UK eSIM and SIM solution, designed for the modern traveller, professional and digital native.
Stay connected wherever life takes you with Clear Mobitel's ultra-fast, reliable eSIM and SIM services. No more swapping SIM cards. Activate your eSIM in seconds and enjoy seamless, uninterrupted connectivity. Whether you're at home, at work, or on the go, Clear Mobitel gives you fast data and crystal clear calls. No boundaries, no interruptions. Perfect for those who need high-speed data for business, entertainment, or everything in between.
And for those exploring the UK, say goodbye to roaming charges. Clear Mobitel keeps you connected without the extra cost.
Clear Mobitel, a new way to connect anytime, anywhere.
I think often the will is lacking with some of these things, and I really don't. So that's why I asked to what end, in many ways, right? I think it seems a reticence. And I can't explain that reticence of why we don't sort of almost flex our muscles, which is what you're asking. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a question of political will, perhaps, to a great extent. Okay, maybe my few last questions would be around your personal experience. Now, you left South Africa involuntarily by way of having testified at the Zondo Commission, the infamous Zondo Commission. For those that are unaware, please do Google it. It's quite a famous conversation. And you testified about your time at Baines and Co. Now, walk me through that experience. Now, firstly, deciding to do it. Secondly, the experience of doing it. Thirdly, having to make that fatal decision or difficult decision, or maybe one could put it that way, of leaving the country.
Yeah. The simple answer is it's a traumatic experience, right? Because I got to the point where I had formed a view that said, I think something's not right here, right? And that could have been mistaken, right? I could have been completely mistaken, but I tried to form a view based on just the evidence I had seen. And I then spoke to people internally, and the reaction was, I was mistaken, or I was misunderstanding it. And so I then have to make a further view about saying, okay, so given what they're saying to me, maybe I should just let it go, right? Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I don't see the whole picture, so I should let this go. And more time went on, I became more and more convinced of the view I'd taken, which was based on evidence. And so my language is also always, I'm not accusing anyone directly. I'm saying I've got documents here, evidence here, and here's how I've interpreted. Now, if I've misinterpreted the evidence, come and tell me, right? And what's interesting at the Zondo Commission, Farai, for the 2 full days that I testified, not a single of the parties I implicated came to cross-examine me. Not one, right? They all sent affidavits to discredit me, and to kind of say I was lying or was misunderstanding. But not a single one was willing to stand in front of a judge.
And during the Zondo Commission, we did see many people testify, and people actually who were accused come and defend themselves.
And they invited. No, absolutely. And so that was the Zondo process. The Zondo process was the moment you implicated anyone, that person or entity was sent notice that they were being implicated, and with the evidence behind the implication, the allegation. And so all 39 of them were invited to come in and challenge me. Many of them were in the room when I was testifying, right? Some looking straight at me as I was testifying, but not a single one came to challenge my testimony. So again, I present this evidence publicly. They all say it's wrong and misunderstood, and I'm being reckless and I'm being mischievous, whatever. But they wouldn't test it. I mean, and Judge Zondo wrote at the end, right? I mean, in his report, he identified me by name, saying he thanks me for what I've done, for not taking any of the financial offers that I had to kind of be silent, and for the first time linking Zuma and some of the other characters with hard evidence.
So how did I feel? I mean, in one vein, you're a hero by virtue of justice, but secondly, you feel that your life is threatened.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, it's so. You could also ask the question, why did no one else stand up with me, right? Because a lot of people saw this evidence. This wasn't me on my own seeing this evidence, right? And I think that's a broader question, right? It's a broader question we have of in society, and in South African society, why don't we stand up for the vulnerable, right? In South Africa, it's common to just kind of drive down the road and see someone lying on the side of the street and we keep driving on, right? When we've got, 1 in 3 women, face some sexual assault, we all just keep going past. So we've got something very, very wrong in our society of kind of seeing vulnerable people and kind of ignoring them. But a lot of the executives, right, even in South Africa today, we've seen things, right? Maybe some people in this room or people listening to this interview have seen things. And we ask the question, why don't they stand up? Now, there's some reasonable answers to that, right? There's fear, there's retaliation, they've got a family to care for, they've got all these things. But then we complain about corruption. Now, who's going to stand up, right? And so I, as an individual, said, if I see this, I see its implication, right? I can't be quiet. So in the first instance, I say, I can't be quiet, I can't be part of this. And so the first thing I did was resign, right? And there are some people who go that far, they'd resign, but then they still remain silent. So the second thing I had to do was not just resign, was to actually make all of that public. And to be honest, I underestimated the blowback I was going to get from that. I completely underestimated the fact that there was no support for whistleblowers in South Africa. In 2019, there wasn't a number to call or a website to go to for help as a public service whistleblower. I went to all the top law firms in the country and to ask for help. And the first thing they did was ask me, who am I implicating? Right? And I send that list and they say they're busy or they can't do this. So my experience was the institutions and the people of power in South Africa who could help me, right, all turned their back on me. And if I name those people, it'll be completely shocking, because it's all the people now in South Africa who stand up and talk about ethical leadership and talk about how bad corruption was, right? Every one of them I've contacted, and all of them said, we can't help you, right? Call an NGO somewhere else. So for me, it was a complete stab in the back by a society who says we want to get rid of corruption. But when we had the opportunity to do something about it, we turned our back on the whistleblowers. I came to the UK on my own, right? No one helped, no one paid for me to come. I paid on my own. I came here on my own with no place to live. I landed here. And I still campaigned when I was here. I still campaigned with Lord Peter Hain around getting accountability for companies involved in corruption. And so we can talk about the cost to me, which was, ruined my life entirely, ruined my career. I'm away from my home, my family, my community. But I think it's a loss to South Africa right now, because all those people are still in the country, right? I wrote to President Ramaphosa 9 times since I got here, saying I need help and support. I'll keep fighting for South Africa, but I need help. Not once did he reply. 3 different South African ambassadors, including the current High Commissioner of South Africa to the UK, approached the president directly, saying we can't have Athol sort of languishing. And on each of the 3 occasions, the other one was Thembi Tambo, right? She approached the president, and he said, "We're not touching that guy." Right. So we've got this president talking about protecting whistleblowers and fighting corruption, but where it's a requirement, he's doing absolutely nothing. And for me, that's a bigger devastation. Because then it does feel like what I've done and the suffering was in vain, because we're not moving forward in our country in terms of arresting this issue and holding people accountable.
Wow. I think that would be my final question. And and we'll allow the audience to engage in the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.